Okay, I'm going to go ahead and model the wheels. Before I do that, I actually want to, I want to clean up my my scene here, and in the outliner I see that I have these two transform nodes. What these are history and remnants of the Boolean operation that I performed, and you can also see it if I go to my mesh here, go to my attribute editor. There's all of the bevels are like still part of the history of like all of these extraneous nodes. If I'm done, I don't want to manipulate any of these past operations. I like the way this looks. I'm going to go ahead and delete all by type history. Let me just show you before I do that though that like I can still access the cylinder and change the way this Boolean looks. Turn off snap to point. Right? You can see how I'm changing the way these two objects interact. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And so that's something that's, nice about using Boolean. You can manipulate it after you've after you perform the function, if you want, by manipulating these transform nodes. Okay, but I'm done manipulating that, and so I'm going to go edit, delete all by type and history. And so that cleans up those transform nodes. It also cleans up all of my nodes in my attribute editor here. Okay. The other thing I want to do is I'm just going to label this body, and I'm going to add it as a layer. And I'm starting to get a couple layers here, so let me just rename some of these layers. Double click here, and I'm going to say this layer 1 is image planes. And here too, I'm going to say this is the body, just so I know. This is just always good practice to keep body layer. It's always good practice to keep everything really organized and well labeled, well named, and saved. Save often, okay? All right, let me go ahead and start to model these wheels. So let me look from the front here. I'm going to do that by creating more primitives, more cylinders, and pull this out here. Again, I'm going to want to rotate it, I guess, in the X direction 90. Okay, I did that right this time. And I want to increase the subdivisions. Let me move this to the front of my xylophone. And I'm going to increase the subdivisions of this cylinder because I have these treads on my wheels that I want to maintain that detail. And so I'm going to go to my attribute editor, and under polycylinder, I'm going to be able to increase that. And I'm going to kind of just eyeball it, what I think looks about as often as you see these treads. So I think maybe 22 is pretty good. And now I'm going to just scale this to the right size. Click off of that. Scale this down. Go ahead and work in wireframe mode so I can look from the side and see what scale this is. It might not be a bad idea to kind of snap this to point again, just to snap it along the edge of this, maybe along the edge. It looks like the wheels, let me look at my front view, my side view. It looks like the wheels are a little bit above the diameter of the wheel is a little bit above the bottom of the xylophone. I'm just going to eyeball that. So I'm going to turn off snap to point. I'm going to increase the size. Let me work in my side view. I'll move this back, increase the size. Okay, so I have one wheel. It's not in the right place here. Let me move it closer to the body. I'm going to turn off my, that's not what I wanted to do. Turn off the visibility of my image planes just so I can see. That looks about right. Okay, so I have this one wheel started. I want to add those treads to this wheel, so I'm going to do that by working in face mode. I'm going to marquee select all of these faces. And I'm going to create an extrude. Let me go to my modeling toolkit and say extrude. And I want to turn faces, keep faces off, because I don't want the faces that I extrude to be touching each other. And what I want to do is I want to just kind of pull a secondary face by clicking one of these scale toolboxes, and then I have the kind of central one. I'm going to want to scale this down. I'm going to use this one too to create a kind of like picture frame of this face inside a face. And so with that, I'm going to then create my treads. Back to my layer editor. That looks like about the right width. And so I'm going to click off of that. My faces that I want to manipulate are still selected. I'm going to go ahead and run that extrude function again, and this time, again, I wanted to keep faces off, and this time I'm going to translate this out, and I'm going to go and scale it down a little bit so it has a bit of a bevel, less in this direction and more in this direction. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I'm also noticing that this wheel does have a little bit of roundness around here. So what I'm going to do is actually use my paint select tool. I'm going to select these faces. And I go in wireframe mode to make sure that I'm not selecting any back faces. I think I'd actually like to select the back faces at the same time. So I'll go ahead and select the back faces. Okay, so I've selected both sides of this wheel, and I'm going to extrude here, keep faces together off, and I'm going to pull this. Maybe I do want to keep that on. Here I'm going to keep it on because they're so far apart that they're not going to connect them anyway. They're not connected. So let me pull this out a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to go back to shaded mode and work in edge mode. And if I double click, this does recognize this edge loop because it has tris and quads around it, so it's recognizing that. Let me select both of these, shift select and double click on both of these edge loops, and I'm going to just add a bevel to the wheel. And I think that looks pretty good for the wheel. Another small detail that I am going to show you how to create is that because this wheel is like it's a cast of a wheel, you see this casting seam here. I kind of like the way that looks. It makes it look like a toy. So I want to recreate that in this wheel. So the way I'm going to do that actually, and right now my grid is kind of getting in my way for being able to see what I'm modeling. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the grid off just by clicking this icon here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert an edge loop into my wheel. Let me make sure I'm working in object mode. And this time I do want to use this equal edge loop thing. Stick one right in the center of my wheel. And then I want to actually I want to place two edge loops here. And then I want to move them in. Let's see if this will let me do it. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to maintain this wheel as a full solid object. I don't want any crazy geometry. Let me go ahead actually, just for just as a kind of lesson, duplicate this wheel and show you what happens if I do it another way. Okay, let me go ahead and delete these edge loops. And remember, I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, Edit Mesh, Delete Edge Vertex, okay, in order to delete all the vertices as well. Because if I just go ahead and hit the delete on my keyboard, all those vertices will still be there, and I do not want them there. I'm just going to insert one edge loop for this one. Okay, so this is what I had originally done. Okay, when I was trying to get this detail in when I was practicing before recording this video, is let me select all these faces here, and all I did was mesh and separate. So now I have I should have two objects here. That's not what I want to do. Let me go to face tool again, select these faces. It wasn't separate, it was detach, I believe. Mesh tools, edit mesh, and detach. So now I have like two halves of this wheel. And what I did was rotated this. Oops, I undid the detach. Let me do that one more time. I'm sorry, I was hitting undo a couple times because I'd moved it. Let me detach again and then rotate these. Right, so that looks, this wheel looks like what it has that offset, those offset treads that make it look like a toy. But if I go ahead and zoom into this, you can see that there's holes in this mesh. And I can fix that. I tried to fix that by saying, selecting these two objects and saying fill hole, right? Which is something that might work. Oh, it's still one object. I can select that object and say fill hole. Right, so now that looks like it did something that works, but if I zoom into the interior of this, or if I hit 4, you can see, maybe, we can't really see it here, but what I've done is, you can see it maybe if I delete a couple faces to look in. I created interior geometry that's not going to, that's making this kind of a broken object. Broken mesh, okay? When there's only one single continuous kind of mesh skin around as your object, any program recognizes that as a solid object. If you start to have anything on the inside, so having anything on the inside doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't have your skin on the inside of your body. You wouldn't have the skin on the inside of this wheel. Okay, so to get around that, right? So this is not correct. If I go and I select, let me go to like face mode here, you can see. See how if I select this, it's actually filled in a face around this entire. And there's a whole face inside here. Okay, we don't want that. Another thing that I tried to do is use the bridge tool to bridge these, to manually patch all of these holes. And that also wasn't working and would be really tedious. So instead of doing that, if I just continue to model this and maintain it as one object, and I can do this really simply by, instead of putting two edge loops, one edge loop, I'll put 2 in, and I can kind of perform the same thing. I can go to face mode, I go to my front view, I can select these faces, And let me go ahead and just rotate them a little bit. And it does the same thing. And it's offsetting those treads. And then what I can do, if I really want, I can insert another edge loop here. And I just want to insert one in the center. And let me go ahead and scale it down so it gives it a little dip. So now what this is doing is it's offsetting those treads. So it looks like the model. Maybe a little too much of a, that looks about good. So I've offsetted those treads, but I've maintained the mesh as one whole object mesh. I hope that makes sense, that this is wrong. This way to do it is wrong. I have sides, I have faces that have hundreds of sides that are on the interior of my mesh. So we don't want this. This is not a clean model. This is not 3D printable. So I'm going to leave that. I do want this, okay, which is that I have tris and quads everywhere on my model, and there's no funky geometry inside. Okay, so I have one wheel modeled, and now what I want to do is I want to, I can duplicate that wheel, but what I can also do, which is a little bit easier, is just go and use my mirror function here under Mesh and Mirror. And I want to mirror it in the world, and I want to mirror it into the Z direction in the positive. So in my axis down here, wherever the line is pointing is the positive, and the other direction is the negative. So let me change this to positive. Combine with original, that's fine. Go ahead and apply. And now, because I've been modeling this right directly at the origin, I've maintained the space between the wheel and the body on both sides of this. And now what I can do also is I can mirror this again, and this time in the X direction in the positive. And now I'm dropping two wheels in the back. And now maybe what I'll do is I want to separate these two objects. I want to separate these wheels, even go ahead and separate them, because I did say combine with original, so they're one object, but I do want to move these back wheels out. So let me go ahead and separate. So now each one of these wheels is its own mesh, own object, just so you can see what that looks like here. It's one poly cylinder, and if I go to separate, it'll create a group called poly cylinder with all my poly surfaces in it. Let me go ahead and right select and pull this out. Delete that. And select these two. Let me select this guy first. And if I go to my channel box, what I want to do actually first is I want this centered pivot, because I separated these objects, the pivot is centered still around this first wheel. So let me go ahead and go to Modify, Center Pivot. And the other thing I want to do, which will be helpful, is to freeze the transformations of this wheel. And what that will do is it will zero out all of my transform specifications in the channel box, and so I can know exactly, if I go and translate it again, it'll give me like an actual number. So what I can do is I can say, okay, it's like negative, I don't want to do it this way. Or let me actually leave it. I don't want to, I'm sorry, excuse me. Scratch all of that. I'm not freezing any transforms right now. What I want to do actually is just translate this. Because I've been modeling around my origin, I don't have to do that, because this this number is going to correlate to this number. One's going to be in the positive and one's going to be in the negative. And if I go ahead and let me modify a center pivot to this guy too. Okay. Should work. I'm not sure if it will. Maybe I do want to do this. Okay, let me actually do it. It's still recognizing this original translate position. So let me go ahead and modify freeze transformations, and that'll zero everything out. I'm going to do the same one with this wheel, modify freeze transformations. And so now I'm going to move this out. So now I can kind of see how much I'm translating it. I'm going to say -1 here. I'm just going to type it in. So it's about maybe -1.1. And I'm going to do the same with this wheel. I'm going to do it in the positive, just 1.1. And that way I know that they're exactly the same distance from each other. So the last thing I want to do is add the axles to these wheels. So I'm just going to create a cylinder here, rotate it in the X direction 90, and scale it out. Scale it out and scale it down. Let me actually stop this video here because I hear that my baby's crying and waking up from a nap. So when I come back, I'm going to finish doing the axles of these wheels. Okay.